Betrayed teacher became a millionaire, her backstabbing. Sister came crawling back. Claire's hands trembled as she stared at the bank statement. 7 figures where there used to be hundreds. The doorbell rang, and through the peephole she saw Jennifer's tear-streaked face pressed against the glass. Her sister's voice cracked through the door. "Claire, please. I know I hurt you, but Craig left me with nothing and Dad needs surgery we can't afford." The same sister who'd stolen her life savings 3 years ago now stood begging. Would Claire open that door? To understand how we got to this moment, we need to go back 3 years, to a time when Claire Simmons believed that love meant sacrifice and family meant putting everyone else's needs before your own. Claire stood in her empty classroom at Roosevelt High, the late afternoon sun streaming through dust-covered windows that hadn't been properly cleaned since the budget cuts began. At 45, she had the kind of face that students remembered fondly years later, warm brown eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses that she constantly pushed up her nose, graying auburn hair always pulled back in a practical bun, and hands permanently stained with red ink from grading papers late into the night. She was organizing donation supplies for her struggling students when her phone buzzed with a text from Jennifer. "Emergency, need to talk." Claire's stomach immediately knotted. Jennifer's emergencies had a way of becoming Claire's problems. But family was family. She'd learned that lesson young, and it had shaped every decision she'd made for 23 years. For 2 decades, Claire had poured her heart into teaching English to teenagers who society had written off. She arrived at school before sunrise, organizing breakfast programs for hungry kids. She stayed until well past dark, tutoring students for free in her classroom that smelled of old textbooks and broken dreams. She spent her own money on classroom supplies, novels that hadn't been in the school budget for 5 years, pencils and paper for kids whose families couldn't afford them, tissues and granola bars for the ones who came to school with more than academic hunger. Her modest teacher's salary of $52,000 barely covered her small apartment rent, her reliable but aging Honda Civic, and the bare necessities of life. But somehow, through careful budgeting and what Sue Foster called miracle management, Claire had saved $47,000 over the years. Every dollar carefully set aside, living on less than she earned, denying herself small luxuries like cable television or dinner out. All so she could help her aging father when the time came, and maybe, just maybe, someday buy a small home of her own. The money sat in her savings account like a security blanket, proof that a teacher's life could have dignity, that careful planning could overcome modest means. She checked the balance every few weeks, watching it grow dollar by precious dollar, imagining the day she might hand her father the keys to a comfortable assisted living facility or walk through the front door of her own little house. Claire had always been the responsible Simmons daughter, a role that had been thrust upon her when she was 22 and their mother lost her battle with breast cancer. While Jennifer, 4 years younger, was the charming one who could talk her way out of any trouble with a dimpled smile and practiced tears, Claire was the steady one who cleaned up the messes, paid the bills, and held the family together with sheer determination and endless patience. Their mother's death had left Claire feeling responsible for everyone. Jennifer, who was just 18 and wild with grief, and their father, Robert, who'd withdrawn into himself so completely that Claire worried he might disappear entirely. She'd taken a teaching job in their hometown instead of pursuing the graduate degree she'd dreamed of, staying close to keep the family from falling apart completely. Jennifer had married Craig Thompson 5 years ago, a man with perfectly styled hair, a charming smile, and 1,000 get-rich-quick schemes, but zero follow-through. Claire had watched her sister fall for his promises of easy wealth and effortless success, the same promises he whispered to anyone who would listen. Craig talked about cryptocurrency investments, pyramid marketing schemes, and business opportunities that always required just a little startup capital to guarantee massive returns. At Sunday dinners at Robert's modest ranch house, Craig dominated conversations with his latest brilliant idea, while Jennifer hung on his every word like he was revealing the secrets of the universe. "We just need some startup capital," Craig would explain, his eyes gleaming with the fervor of a true believer. "Jennifer mentioned you've got some savings, Claire. Family should invest in family, right? We're talking about real money here, enough to set us all up for life." Claire's stomach would twist every time, but she'd learned to deflect politely, changing the subject or making excuses about retirement planning. She'd seen too many of Craig's ventures collapse spectacularly, leaving other people holding the debt while he moved on to the next sure thing. Jennifer would pout when Claire declined to invest, but she'd never pushed too hard, not yet. Her anchor in all of this was Sue Foster, her colleague and closest friend for 18 years. Sue was a no-nonsense math teacher with silver-streaked hair pulled back in a practical ponytail and sharp blue eyes that missed nothing. She had the kind of dry wit that could defuse tension in a faculty meeting and the fierce loyalty that made her defend her friends like a mother bear protecting her cubs. "You give and give until there's nothing left," Sue would warn her during their lunch breaks in the faculty lounge, watching Claire sort through yet another stack of papers she'd taken home to grade. "One day, you're going to have to choose between saving them and saving yourself. And honey, you can't save someone who doesn't want to be saved." But Claire couldn't help herself. When Jennifer called with car trouble, Claire paid for the repairs. When Craig's latest business venture left them short on rent, Claire quietly slipped them money with the understanding that it was a loan, though she never expected to see it returned. When Robert needed new eyeglasses that his insurance wouldn't cover, Claire took care of it without being asked. She told herself it was love, family loyalty, the right thing to do. But late at night, lying in her narrow bed in her sparse apartment, Claire sometimes wondered if it was actually fear. Fear of being seen as selfish, fear of losing the only family she had left, fear of admitting that her sacrifices might not actually be helping anyone. If you've ever felt like the family member everyone turns to in a crisis, let me know in the comments below. Your support means everything to this community. Claire had started having strange dreams about empty bank accounts and locked doors. She'd wake with her heart pounding and the unsettling feeling that something was shifting, that her careful, controlled world was about to crack wide open. In her dreams, she'd reach for her savings account and find nothing but air, reach for her family and find they'd disappeared like smoke. She'd shake off the dreams, make her morning coffee in the cheap machine she'd bought at a thrift store, and drive to school in the Honda that rattled but never quite died. She'd unlock her classroom, turn on the lights, and prepare for another day of teaching kids who needed someone to believe in them, someone who wouldn't give up no matter how many times they failed or fought back. As she walked to her car after another 12-hour day, grading papers stuffed into her worn messenger bag, Claire felt the familiar ache between her shoulder blades from hunching over student essays. At 45, she sometimes wondered what her life might have been if she'd been braver, more selfish, less willing to sacrifice her dreams for other people's comfort. But family was family, and she'd been raised to believe that love meant sacrifice, that good people put others first, that asking for anything for yourself was somehow selfish and wrong. She had no idea that Jennifer and Craig had already visited her bank that morning, armed with forged documents and a sob story that would change everything. She had no idea that while she was teaching Romeo and Juliet to her 5th period class, explaining how love could be both beautiful and destructive, her entire life savings was being transferred into accounts she'd never seen. She had no idea that tomorrow morning would bring a phone call that would shatter everything she thought she knew about family, trust, and her own worth. She had no idea that losing everything she'd worked for would be the beginning of discovering what she was truly capable of. Claire Simmons, the quiet teacher who lived on the margins of everyone else's stories, was about to become the author of her own. Chapter 2. The call came on a Tuesday morning during Claire's planning period while she was organizing notes for her afternoon classes and trying to figure out how to make 12 outdated textbooks stretch across 28 students. The phone's shrill ring cut through the quiet of her empty classroom like a knife. "Ms. Simmons, this is Karen Williams from First National Bank. We're calling about the large withdrawal from your savings account yesterday. We wanted to confirm this was authorized, as it's quite a substantial amount." Claire's coffee cup slipped from her numb fingers, shattering against the linoleum floor in a splash of brown liquid and ceramic fragments. The sound echoed in the sudden silence as her mind struggled to process the words. Withdrawal? What withdrawal? She hadn't been to the bank in weeks. "I'm sorry, there must be some mistake," she managed, her voice sounding strange and distant to her own ears. "I didn't make any withdrawal yesterday. I was here teaching all day." There was a pause, the kind of pause that contains entire worlds of terrible possibility. "Ma'am, according to our records, $47,000 was withdrawn from your savings account at 2:15 p.m. yesterday. The transaction was conducted by your authorized representative using proper documentation." The room tilted sideways. Claire gripped the edge of her desk, her knuckles white against the fake wood grain. $47,000, her entire life savings, gone. "I need to come in," she whispered, "right now." Within 2 hours, Claire sat in the bank manager's sterile office, staring at security footage of Jennifer and Craig confidently conducting what the teller had believed was legitimate business. They'd used a forged power of attorney document, convincing in its official appearance, and Craig's smooth talking had filled in whatever gaps the paperwork hadn't covered. "Your sister was quite convincing," the bank manager said apologetically, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and helpless hands. "She explained that you were unable to come in person due to a medical emergency, and the documentation appeared to be in order. We had no reason to suspect they stole from me." The words came out flat, factual, void of the emotion that was screaming inside Claire's chest. "My own sister and her husband stole my life savings. Every dollar she'd saved in 23 years of teaching, every sacrifice, every dinner of cereal because groceries were expensive, every time she'd chosen to stay home instead of going out because she couldn't afford it. Gone in a single transaction while she was teaching kids about the power of language and the importance of trust." Claire drove to Jennifer's house with hands that shook on the steering wheel, her mind reeling. Between disbelief and growing fury, she found them loading suitcases into Craig's BMW, a car that cost more than Claire made in a year, she realized with bitter clarity. Going somewhere? Claire's voice was steady, but her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. Jennifer's face went pale, all the blood draining from her cheeks as she recognized the tone in her sister's voice. But Craig stepped forward with that familiar, charming smile, the one that had convinced bank tellers and family members, and probably himself, that whatever he was doing was perfectly reasonable. "Claire, we were just coming to see you. We needed a little loan for this incredible opportunity. Cryptocurrency mining, completely legal, guaranteed returns. We would have asked, but you know how you are about money. Always so careful, so worried about everything. You stole from me." The words hung in the spring air like an accusation from God himself. Jennifer's face crumpled into the practiced tears that had gotten her out of trouble since she was 5 years old. "Claire, you don't understand. Craig's business venture, we would have paid you back with interest, more than you could ever make in that savings account. We're family. Family helps family." Claire felt something fundamental break inside her chest, not just her financial security, but her understanding of herself, her worth, her place in a world she'd thought she understood. That money was for Dad's medical expenses, for emergencies, for my future. You knew that. "You're a teacher, Claire," Craig said dismissively, as if her 23 years of dedication were something small and easily replaced. "You've got job security, benefits, a pension someday. We needed it more. We're trying to build something real here, not just treading water like you." The casual cruelty of his words hit her like a physical blow. Treading water. Is that what her life looked like to them? Is that what 23 years of shaping young minds and changing lives amounted to? Claire filed a police report that afternoon, sitting in a stark room that smelled of disinfectant and despair, telling her story to an officer who looked barely older than her students. Detective Martinez was kind but realistic, his dark eyes sympathetic but not particularly hopeful. "Family disputes are tricky, ma'am," he said, clicking his pen in a rhythm that matched Claire's rapidly beating heart, without clear evidence of intent to permanently deprive, and with them claiming it was a loan within the family. "Well, it's complicated. We'll investigate, but I want to be honest about the challenges we're facing here." The legal system she'd always trusted, the same system she taught her students to respect in their civics lessons, suddenly felt as fragile as tissue paper. Justice, it seemed, was more complicated than the textbook suggested. Claire couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, couldn't focus on the lesson plans that had always been her refuge. Students noticed something was wrong when their usually attentive teacher seemed distracted, fragile, like a woman walking through glass. "You okay, Miss Simmons?" asked Marcus Williams, a tough kid from the projects who'd started the semester barely able to read and was now devouring novels like a man starved for stories. His concern, genuine and unguarded, nearly broke what was left of her composure. "I'm fine, Marcus," she lied, the words tasting like ash, "just tired." But she wasn't fine. She was drowning in the realization that the people she'd loved most had seen her as nothing more than a resource to be exploited, a problem to be managed, a source of funds for their dreams, while her own withered away. Jennifer launched a family campaign that week, painting Claire as vindictive and money-obsessed to anyone who would listen. The story she told was masterful in its manipulation. Claire was being unreasonable about a simple family loan, choosing money over relationships, letting pride destroy the bonds that should matter most. Their father called on Thursday evening, his voice confused and disappointed. "Claire, honey, I don't understand why you're making such a big deal about this. Jennifer says it was just a misunderstanding, that you're being stubborn about some money she borrowed. Family forgives family, sweetheart. That's what your mother would have wanted." The words hit like physical blows, each one carefully chosen to pierce the armor she was trying to build around her wounded heart. Even her own father couldn't see the magnitude of the betrayal, couldn't understand that this wasn't about money. It was about respect, trust, basic human decency. Standing in her empty apartment that night, eating cereal for dinner because she couldn't afford groceries until payday, Claire felt something new stirring beneath the hurt and confusion. Anger. Pure, clean, righteous anger. For the first time in her life, she wasn't making excuses for Jennifer's behavior or trying to understand Craig's perspective or wondering if maybe she was overreacting. They had stolen from her. They had dismissed her pain. They had counted on her being too weak, too nice, too pathetically grateful for family connection to fight back. But they had miscalculated. They had pushed the wrong woman too far, taken too much, assumed that kindness meant weakness. They had no idea what they had unleashed when they decided to bet against Claire Simmons finally learning her own worth. Sue found her crying in the faculty lounge the next day and listened to the whole story without interruption, her normally sharp features soft with compassion and growing fury. "What are you going to do?" Sue asked quietly, her hands wrapped around her coffee mug like an anchor. Claire wiped her eyes, and for the first time in weeks, her voice was steady and sure. "I'm going to start over. I'm going to build something they can never take away from me. And I'm never going to let anyone make me feel this small again." She didn't know how yet, didn't have a plan or a strategy or even hope, but she had something she'd never possessed before. The absolute certainty that she deserved better, and the burning determination to prove it to herself and everyone who had ever underestimated the quiet teacher with the gentle heart and the steel spine. Chapter 3. Claire threw herself into work with the desperate intensity of a woman who had nothing left to lose and everything to prove. She arrived at Roosevelt High before sunrise, her Honda's headlights cutting through the darkness as she pulled into the empty parking lot. She stayed until the security guards made their final rounds, grading papers by the harsh fluorescent lights of her classroom while the building settled into nighttime silence around her. If she couldn't control what her family had done to her, she could at least excel at what she did best. She began documenting every innovative teaching strategy she'd developed over the years, every student success story that proved her methods worked, every curriculum improvement she'd created that had never been officially recognized or compensated. During parent-teacher conferences 3 weeks after the theft, she met Gracie Hughes, a woman who would change the trajectory of her entire life without either of them realizing it at first. Gracie was the mother of Marcus Williams, the tough kid who'd started the semester barely able to read and was now devouring novels with the hunger of someone discovering magic. Gracie was a successful African-American businesswoman in her 50s, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit that spoke of both success and hard-won battles. She had built a consulting firm from nothing after her divorce 15 years earlier, turning her experience in corporate restructuring into a business that helped companies navigate change and crisis. "Miss Simmons," Gracie said after they'd finished discussing Marcus's remarkable progress, "I've been watching what you do here. My son comes home talking about your classes like you're performing miracles. Have you ever thought about packaging your teaching methods for a broader audience?" The question caught Claire off guard. She'd been so focused on surviving day to day, on holding herself together in the wake of her family's betrayal, that she hadn't thought beyond the walls of her classroom. "I don't understand what you mean." "You've developed something special here," Gracie continued, her dark eyes sharp with business acumen. "These aren't just teaching techniques. They're a complete system for reaching kids that everyone else has given up on. You've got a gift for connecting with struggling learners, for building their confidence along with their skills. That's not just valuable in this classroom, that's valuable everywhere." Meanwhile, Jennifer continued her campaign of manipulation, sending tearful text messages about how hurt she was by Claire's coldness and obsession with money over family. The messages came at all hours, during Claire's lunch break, while she was grading papers, in the middle of lessons when her phone would buzz with notifications of Jennifer's emotional warfare. Craig escalated his approach, showing up at the school one afternoon, charming the front office staff with his expensive cologne and practiced smile before cornering Claire in the parking lot as she tried to escape to her car. "Come on, Claire," he said, leaning against her Honda like he owned it, blocking her path to the driver's door. "You're being dramatic about this whole thing. We're family. Let's move past this little disagreement and get back to normal." "Little disagreement?" Claire's voice was ice, colder than she'd ever heard herself sound. "You stole my life savings." "We borrowed it," Craig corrected with the patience of someone explaining basic concepts to a child. "There's a difference. And if you keep making a scene like this, you're going to tear this family apart. Is that what you want? To be responsible for destroying the only family you have left?" The manipulation was so textbook, it almost made Claire laugh. Almost. "I didn't destroy anything, Craig. You did when you decided to steal from someone who trusted you." But even as she said the words, Claire battled constant self-doubt that crept in during the quiet moments. Late at night, she'd replay Jennifer's words. "You're making such a big deal about this." Was she? Had she overreacted? The voice in her head, the one that had kept her small and accommodating for 45 years, whispered that maybe she was being selfish, dramatic, unforgiving. Maybe good people did let family members make mistakes. Maybe love meant absorbing pain without complaint. "They're gaslighting you," Sue said bluntly during lunch in the faculty lounge, her math teacher's mind cutting through the emotional manipulation with surgical precision. It's classic abuse behavior. They hurt you, then make you feel guilty for being upset about it. They steal your money, then convince you that being angry about theft makes you the problem. Don't you dare apologize for having standards. Claire began documenting everything Jennifer and Craig had done, not for legal purposes anymore. Detective Martinez had been clear about the challenges of prosecution, but for her own sanity. She needed to see it written down, to validate her own experience against their campaign to rewrite history. She opened a new bank account at a different institution across town, one where no one knew her family's story. She changed her phone number and gave the new one only to people she trusted completely. She began the slow, careful process of rebuilding not just her financial life, but her sense of reality itself. Gracie's suggestion about packaging her teaching methods kept echoing in Claire's mind as she worked with her struggling students. She developed a unique approach to teaching reading by connecting literature to students' personal experiences, helping them see their own stories reflected in the books they read. Her success rate with at-risk students was extraordinary. Kids who'd been written off by other teachers were not just passing her class, they were discovering a love of learning that surprised everyone, including themselves. But she'd never thought of her methods as a marketable skill, never considered that what came naturally to her might be valuable beyond the walls of Roosevelt High. She was just a teacher, after all. Just someone who cared too much and worked too hard for too little recognition. When Gracie invited Claire to coffee to discuss a potential business partnership, Claire's first instinct was to decline. She wasn't a businesswoman. She didn't have capital, connections, or experience in anything beyond the classroom. She was someone who ate cereal for dinner and drove a car that rattled when it started. But then she remembered standing in her empty apartment after discovering the theft, feeling smaller and more powerless than she'd ever felt in her life. She remembered Jennifer's dismissive words about her little teacher job and Craig's casual cruelty about treading water. She remembered the way her own father had minimized her pain, choosing Jennifer's version of events over her own daughter's truth. The resistance campaign from her family escalated as word spread about her meeting with Gracie. Jennifer involved other family members, orchestrating a chorus of disappointed voices that reached out to Claire with variations of the same message: forgive and forget. Choose family over pride. Stop being so vindictive over money. Her cousin Margaret called, her voice heavy with manufactured disappointment. Claire, I don't understand what's gotten into you. We've always looked up to you as the responsible one, the one who held the family together. But this vendetta against Jennifer is tearing everyone apart. She made a mistake. Can't you find it in your heart to forgive her? Robert called weakly now, his voice tired and confused, each conversation a reminder of how completely Jennifer had rewritten the narrative. Claire, I don't understand what's happening to our family. Jennifer is your sister. She's going through a hard time with Craig's business troubles. Why can't you just let this go and help her like you always have? Standing in her classroom one evening, surrounded by student essays about overcoming obstacles and finding their voices, Claire realized she was teaching lessons about courage and self-advocacy that she wasn't living herself. Her students wrote about standing up to bullies, about refusing to accept limitations others placed on them, about believing in their own worth despite what the world told them. How could she guide them toward strength while accepting weakness in her own life? How could she teach them to value themselves while she allowed her family to treat her as nothing more than a financial resource? That night, Claire called Gracie and accepted the coffee meeting. I don't know anything about business, she admitted, her voice steady despite her racing heart. You know about results, Gracie replied warmly. You know about turning failure into success, about reaching people that everyone else has given up on. That's exactly what the world needs, and that's exactly what we can build together. When Jennifer discovered that Claire was wasting time on impossible dreams instead of healing the family. Her mask finally slipped completely. The phone call came at midnight, Jennifer's voice sharp with a rage that Claire had never heard before. "You're pathetic, Claire. You actually think you're going to become some big-shot businesswoman? You're a small-town teacher who's too scared to even go on a date, too boring to keep a conversation going at family dinners. You need us more than we need you, and deep down, you know it. Without us, what are you? Nothing." The words were designed to destroy, calculated missiles aimed at every insecurity Claire had ever confessed, every fear she'd ever shared with the sister she'd trusted with her vulnerabilities. 3 months earlier, they would have worked. 3 months earlier, Claire would have apologized, begged forgiveness, shrunk back into the familiar role of grateful family appendage. But as she stood in her small kitchen, holding the phone while Jennifer's venom poured through the speaker, Claire realized something fundamental had shifted. She wasn't afraid of Jennifer's opinion anymore. She was afraid of something much worse. Continuing to live a life where Jennifer's opinion mattered more than her own self-respect, where family loyalty meant accepting cruelty, where love required her to make herself smaller so others could feel bigger. "I'm sorry you feel that way, Jennifer," Claire said quietly and hung up the phone. For the first time in her adult life, she had chosen herself over keeping the peace. And despite everything Jennifer had predicted, the sky didn't fall. The world didn't end. Claire Simmons was still standing, still breathing, still worthy of respect and kindness. She was ready to prove it to herself and everyone else. Chapter 4. Claire met Gracie at a small coffee shop downtown, her hands shaking slightly as she carried her worn teacher's messenger bag filled with lesson plans, student testimonials, and 23 years of accumulated wisdom that she'd never thought to value properly. The morning sun streamed through the windows, casting everything in golden light that felt like possibility. Gracie listened intently as Claire explained her reading recovery methods, her approach to connecting with struggling learners, and her track record of success with students that other teachers had written off as hopeless. With each story Claire shared, Gracie's eyes grew brighter, her questions more focused, her excitement more palpable. "Claire, you've developed something remarkable here," Gracie said, leaning forward across the small table. "These aren't just teaching techniques. They're a complete system for building confidence and literacy skills simultaneously. The way you connect reading with personal identity, the way you help kids see themselves as capable learners rather than academic failures, that's revolutionary. I want to help you turn this into an online curriculum that can reach thousands of students across the country." Claire's first response was automatic, trained into her by decades of self-deprecation. "Oh, I'm not really qualified to—" She caught herself mid-sentence, remembering Sue's advice about self-advocacy, remembering her promise to never let anyone make her feel small again. That included making herself feel small. "I'm interested," she said instead, her voice stronger. "I've never done anything like this before, but I'm interested in learning." "Neither had I when I started my first business," Gracie smiled, her warmth genuine and encouraging. "But I recognized good ideas and good people when I saw them. You're both, Claire. The question isn't whether you're capable. It's whether you're ready to believe in yourself as much as you believe in your students." Claire spent every free moment over the next month learning about online education platforms, digital marketing strategies, and curriculum development processes. Gracie introduced her to web designers who spoke in languages of user experience and conversion rates, educational technology specialists who understood the intersection of pedagogy and programming, and former teachers who'd successfully transitioned from classroom to entrepreneurship. Each conversation expanded Claire's understanding of what was possible, but also highlighted how much she had to learn. The business world had its own vocabulary, its own rhythms, its own measures of success that had nothing to do with the quiet satisfaction of watching a struggling student finally understand a complex concept. As word spread about Claire's business venture, Jennifer's campaign became more aggressive and more personal. She showed up at family gatherings with carefully crafted stories about how Claire was abandoning family for money and getting too big for her britches. She painted herself as the abandoned sister, trying desperately to heal a relationship that Claire was selfishly destroying over a simple misunderstanding. Robert began calling weekly, his voice heavy with worry and confusion. "Claire, honey, I'm concerned about you. Jennifer says you're changing, becoming someone I wouldn't recognize. She's worried that this business thing is making you forget what really matters. Family, community, the simple things that brought you joy. I don't want to see you lose yourself chasing money like so many people do." The conversations left Claire shaken, not because she believed Jennifer's version of events, but because she could hear her father's genuine concern. He wasn't manipulating her. He was repeating lies that Jennifer had fed him with surgical precision, targeting his deepest fears about losing another daughter to what he saw as the corrupting influence of ambition. Claire's first small victory came when she successfully presented her reading methods to the school district's curriculum committee, a group of administrators and department heads who rarely paid attention to individual teachers' innovations. Standing in the conference room where she'd sat silently through countless meetings, Claire articulated her approach with clarity and passion that surprised even herself. She explained how her methods worked not just on academic skills, but on student self-concept as learners. She showed data on reading improvement, but more importantly, she shared stories of transformation. Kids who went from hating books to choosing reading over video games, students who discovered their own voices through literature, young people who learned to see themselves as intellectually capable for the first time in their lives. The committee approved pilot funding for her program in 3 schools across the district. It was a small victory, but Claire felt something she hadn't experienced in months: professional validation that had nothing to do with her family's approval. "You commanded that room," Sue observed afterward, walking with Claire to the parking lot. "I've never seen you so confident, so articulate about your own work. It was like watching you finally step into yourself." Building momentum, Claire received an unexpected phone call that would prove pivotal to her transformation. Ashley Williams, her former student who was now 28 and working in digital marketing in the city, had heard about the business venture through Marcus, her younger brother. "Miss Simmons, you literally saved my academic life when I was 16, Ashley said, her voice warm with genuine affection. "I was failing everything, convinced I was stupid, ready to drop out and disappoint everyone who'd ever tried to help me. Your class was the first place I ever felt smart. The first time a teacher made me believe I had something valuable to contribute. I'd love to help you reach other kids who need what you gave me." Ashley's expertise in social media and digital marketing became invaluable to Claire's growing business venture. She helped Claire understand how to present her story, her methods, and her mission to a broader audience. More importantly, she helped Claire see herself through the eyes of someone whose life had been genuinely transformed by her teaching. When Jennifer discovered that Ashley was helping Claire, she launched a vicious attack, calling the young woman and attempting to undermine her confidence in Claire's abilities. Jennifer claimed that Claire was using people and that her teaching methods had never been that special, that Ashley's success was due to her own hard work, not anything Claire had done. But Ashley had spent years watching Claire transform struggling students, and she wasn't swayed by Jennifer's manipulation tactics. "Ms. Simmons," Ashley said after reporting the phone call, "your sister is trying to keep you small because your growth threatens her control over you. She's terrified that you'll realize you don't need her approval to be successful. Don't let her win." Claire began to see patterns she'd never noticed before, or perhaps had chosen not to see. Every time she showed excitement about a new opportunity, Jennifer would find a way to undermine it. Every time Claire received recognition for her work, Jennifer would minimize it or find flaws to focus on. Every time Claire started to stand taller, feel more confident, believe in her own capabilities, Jennifer would find a way to cut her down to size. It wasn't love. It was control. It wasn't family support. It was systematic sabotage designed to keep Claire in her assigned role as the family workhorse, grateful for whatever scraps of affection she received in exchange for her service and sacrifice. Working with Gracie's team of consultants and developers, Claire began developing Reading Renaissance, an online platform that combined her literacy methods with interactive exercises, video lessons, and community support features. The work was challenging, requiring her to articulate teaching instincts she'd developed over decades, to break down into systematic steps what had become second nature. But it was also exhilarating. For the first time in her professional life, Claire was creating something that belonged entirely to her, something that could scale beyond the limitations of a single classroom or a single school district. She was building a legacy that couldn't be stolen, undermined, or diminished by anyone else's insecurities. A local education magazine featured Claire's work in their Innovative Educators section, highlighting her success with at-risk students and mentioning her new business venture. The article included a photograph of Claire in her classroom, surrounded by student work and testimonials, looking confident and purposeful in a way that surprised her when she saw it in print. For the first time in her adult life, Claire felt genuinely proud of an accomplishment that belonged entirely to her. No one else could take credit for the methods she'd developed, the relationships she'd built with struggling students, or the business she was creating from her own expertise and passion. Jennifer's reaction to the magazine article was swift and vicious. She called Claire that evening, her voice cold with a rage that made previous confrontations seem mild by comparison. "So now you're some kind of celebrity," Jennifer's words dripped with contempt. "Don't forget where you came from, Claire. Don't forget who was there for you when Mom died, who needed you when you were just a nobody, teacher with no life outside of school." "You were 17 when Mom died, Jennifer," Claire replied, her voice steady and factual. "I was 22. I was the one who took care of both you and Dad, who put my own life on hold to keep our family together." "And now you're throwing that in my face? Using our mother's death to justify your selfishness? You're not the same person anymore, Claire. Success has made you cold, made you forget what really matters." For the first time in a conversation with Jennifer, Claire didn't apologize. She didn't try to smooth things over, didn't minimize her achievements to make Jennifer feel better, didn't accept responsibility for Jennifer's emotions or reactions. "I'm proud of what I'm building," she said quietly but firmly. "I wish you could be happy for me, but your feelings about my success are not my responsibility to manage." "Happy for you?" Jennifer's voice rose to a near shriek. "While Dad needs help and you're off playing businesswoman? While our family falls apart because you can't forgive a simple mistake? You've become everything Mom would have hated. Selfish, money-obsessed, too good for the people who loved you first." The conversation crystallized something crucial for Claire. She realized that Jennifer's definition of family love required her to stay small, grateful, and dependent. It demanded that she accept disrespect, absorb others' problems, and never expect reciprocal support or basic consideration. Real love, the kind she showed her students, the kind Sue demonstrated, the kind Ashley and Gracie offered, celebrated growth and encouraged independence. Real love didn't require anyone to diminish themselves so others could feel superior. As Claire prepared for her first major presentation to potential investors, she felt something she'd never experienced before, genuine excitement about her own future. She was no longer just surviving Jennifer's betrayal. She was using it as fuel to build something meaningful and lasting. Standing in the mirror before the investor presentation, adjusting the new professional blazer that Gracie had encouraged her to buy, Claire saw someone different looking back at her. Not the defeated woman who discovered her empty bank account 6 months earlier, but someone who was claiming her own space in the world, someone who had learned her own worth through the painful but necessary process of losing everything she'd thought mattered. She was ready for her first real test as an entrepreneur, ready to prove that the quiet teacher from Roosevelt High had something valuable to offer the world. She was ready to discover just how much she was capable of when she finally stopped asking permission to succeed. If you've ever discovered a talent or strength you didn't know you had, share your story in the comments. Sometimes our biggest breakthroughs come from our deepest challenges. The presentation room was filled with potential investors, educational technology executives, and venture capital representatives who could make or break her dream with a single decision. But for the first time in her life, Claire wasn't afraid of being judged. She knew her worth, and she was ready to prove it. Chapter 5. Claire stood before the conference room of potential investors, her heart pounding but her voice steady as she began the presentation that would change her life forever. She presented Rating Renaissance with a passion and precision that surprised even herself, explaining how her methods had helped hundreds of struggling students discover not just their academic potential, but their sense of self-worth. She spoke about Marcus Williams, who'd gone from barely literate to writing poetry that made his classmates cry. She talked about Sarah Chen, who'd been labeled learning disabled by other teachers, but became a voracious reader under Claire's guidance. She shared data on reading improvement rates, but more powerfully, she shared stories of transformation, young people who learned to see themselves as capable, intelligent, worthy of academic success. When she finished, the room was silent for a moment that felt like an eternity. Then the questions began. Not skeptical challenges designed to poke holes in her presentation, but genuine interest from people who recognized something special when they saw it. Ms. Simmons, your success rates with at-risk students are remarkable, said Dr. Patricia Hernandez from EdTech Solutions, one of the largest educational publishers in the country. How quickly could you scale this program for national implementation? The life-changing offer came 2 days later. EdTech Solutions proposed a preliminary contract worth $200,000 for the rights to develop and distribute her curriculum nationwide. The offer was contingent on a successful pilot program, but it represented more money than Claire had ever imagined earning, more than 4 times her annual teaching salary. Gracie gripped her hand as they reviewed the contract terms. "This is just the beginning," she whispered, her eyes bright with excitement. "Once they see what you can do on a larger scale, the sky's the limit." Walking to her car after the meeting, Claire felt something she'd never experienced. The knowledge that she was valuable not because of what she could do for others, but because of who she was and what she'd created. For 45 years, she'd believed her worth came from service, sacrifice, and making other people comfortable. Now she understood that her teaching gift, her innovative methods, her ability to reach struggling students, these weren't just nice qualities. They were marketable skills that could change lives on a massive scale. That evening, as Claire sat in her apartment reviewing the contract details, her phone rang with a call that brought her crashing back to family reality. Robert's voice was weaker than she'd heard it in years, filled with a fear that made her stomach clench with familiar anxiety. "Claire, honey, I hate to worry you, but I've been having some chest pains. The doctor wants to run some tests and, well, they're talking about the possibility of heart surgery. The insurance will cover most of it, but there could be out-of-pocket costs, and with Jennifer and Craig having money troubles..." Claire drove to the hospital that night, her mind reeling between excitement about her business success and terror about her father's health. She found Jennifer and Craig already there, camping in the waiting room like devoted children, comforting Robert with practiced tenderness that might have fooled anyone who didn't know the full story. Craig pulled her aside with the smooth confidence of someone who'd never doubted his right to make demands. "Look, Claire, I know we had our differences in the past, but Robert needs this surgery. Jennifer told me about your big business deal. This is perfect timing. Family comes first, right? We can put our disagreements behind us and focus on what really matters." Something in Craig's tone, too smooth, too prepared, too perfectly timed with her business success, made Claire suspicious. She asked to speak to the doctor privately, using her new confidence to insist on direct information rather than accepting family interpretations. Dr. Patel was kind but clear. While Robert's condition was serious and would require monitoring, the surgery could be scheduled within the next 6 months, not immediately. Payment plans were available, and the hospital had financial assistance programs. It wasn't the emergency Jennifer and Craig had portrayed to create pressure for immediate financial assistance. Through careful questioning over the next few days, Claire learned that Jennifer and Craig had been systematically isolating their father, telling him that Claire was too busy with her business success to visit or help with his medical concerns. They'd inflated the urgency of his condition and the financial burden to create emotional leverage for their own purposes. "They've been manipulating him," Sue said when Claire called her that night, exhausted from piecing together the full scope of the deception. "Making him dependent on them while painting you as the selfish daughter who abandoned him for money. It's textbook emotional abuse." For the first time in her life, Claire allowed herself to feel pure rage, not just at the theft of her savings, not just at the lies about her character, but at the systematic way Jennifer and Craig had worked to undermine her relationship with her father while positioning themselves as his devoted caregivers. She realized that every family gathering for years had involved subtle digs designed to diminish her. Comments about how nice it must be to have summers off from teaching, suggestions that maybe she'd have a social life if she put herself out there more, observations about how uptight she was about money management. They'd been conditioning her to see herself as less than, preparing her to be grateful for whatever scraps of approval they offered. But now Claire could see the manipulation with crystal clarity. They'd been systematically eroding her confidence for years, keeping her small and manageable, ensuring that she'd remain the family resource who never expected anything in return. That realization led to 3 decisions that marked Claire's point of no return. First, she would pay for her father's medical care directly, cutting Jennifer and Craig out of any financial arrangements. She'd work with the hospital's billing department to establish payment plans and ensure Robert received the best possible care without giving her sister and brother-in-law any opportunity to manipulate the situation. Second, she would have an honest conversation with Robert about what had really happened with her savings, about Jennifer and Craig's manipulation tactics, and about her own journey toward independence and self-respect. He deserved to know the truth, even if he chose not to believe it. Third, she would never again apologize for her success or minimize her achievements to make others comfortable. She would never again shrink herself to fit into spaces that were too small for her growing sense of self-worth. While dealing with family drama, Claire received news that validated every risk she'd taken and every boundary she'd established. The pilot program for Reading Renaissance had been approved by 3 school districts, and the early results exceeded everyone's expectations. Students weren't just improving academically, they were gaining confidence, developing critical thinking skills, and beginning to see themselves as capable learners rather than academic failures. Teachers reported transformation stories that echoed Claire's own classroom experiences. Kids who'd been written off as hopeless were discovering their voices, finding their strengths, learning to advocate for themselves in ways that extended far beyond reading comprehension. Local news picked up the story of the teacher-turned-entrepreneur whose innovative methods were transforming education across multiple districts. Claire found herself being interviewed by reporters, photographed for newspaper articles, and recognized in public as someone who was making a difference on a scale she'd never imagined possible. For someone who'd spent her career working in the background, the attention was overwhelming, but also deeply validating. People were finally seeing what she'd always known, but never been able to articulate. that her work mattered, that her methods were special, that her 23 years of dedication to struggling students had created something genuinely valuable. The media attention sent Jennifer into a fury that revealed the depths of her desperation and the extent of her manipulation. She began spreading rumors throughout their small town, calling Claire's former colleagues and even reaching out to parents of her current students with stories about how success had changed Claire, made her selfish and money-obsessed, caused her to abandon her family when they needed her most. But to Jennifer's surprise and Claire's amazement, the community response was overwhelmingly supportive. Former students reached out to defend their favorite teacher. Parents shared stories about how Claire had helped their children succeed when other educators had given up. Colleagues pushed back against Jennifer's narrative with their own experiences of Claire's dedication and generosity. The community support was something Claire had never experienced before. Recognition and validation that had nothing to do with family obligation or guilt, but everything to do with genuine appreciation for her contributions and character. Standing in her apartment one evening, looking at framed newspaper articles about her business success and walls covered with thank you letters from former students, Claire realized she was no longer the same person who discovered her empty bank account 8 months earlier. That woman had been defined by what others thought of her, limited by her need for approval, and convinced that her value came from self-sacrifice and accommodation. This woman, the one looking back from the newspaper photos, the one building a business empire from her teaching expertise, was someone who knew her own worth, had built something meaningful from her own talents and determination, and refused to be diminished by others' insecurities or jealousy. Claire could sense that Jennifer and Craig weren't finished with their campaign against her. Their financial situation was becoming more desperate, her success was becoming more visible, and their father's medical needs provided the perfect emotional leverage for one final attempt to break her down and reassert control. But for the first time in her life, Claire wasn't afraid of the confrontation that was coming. She was ready to protect what she'd built, defend who she'd become, and prove once and for all that love doesn't require anyone to make themselves smaller so others can feel bigger. The woman who would eventually face Jennifer at her doorstep would be someone her sister had never met before, someone who had learned that self-respect isn't selfish, that success isn't something to apologize for, and that the best way to honor her mother's memory was to become the strong, independent, genuinely empowered woman she'd raised Claire to be. Chapter 6. 2 years after the theft that had shattered her financial security and illusions about family loyalty, Claire's life had transformed beyond recognition. Reading Renaissance had become a $1 million business, with school districts across 15 states implementing her curriculum. The quiet teacher who'd once eaten cereal for dinner was now featured on education conference stages and business magazine covers. But success brought its own challenges. The pressure from building a company, managing employees, and scaling operations had begun affecting Claire's health and well-being. She was working 18-hour days, managing everything from curriculum development to investor relations, trying to prove she deserved every opportunity that came her way. The breaking point came during a particularly stressful week when 3 major deals were pending. Her team was struggling with technical difficulties, and the media attention was becoming overwhelming. Claire collapsed in her office from exhaustion, and Sue found her there at midnight, surrounded by paperwork and empty coffee cups. "You're doing it again," Sue said gently, helping Claire to the couch in her office. "You're trying to prove your worth by working yourself to death. Success doesn't require you to sacrifice your health any more than family required you to sacrifice your dignity." That conversation led Claire to hire additional staff, delegate responsibilities, and begin practicing the same self-care she'd always encouraged her students to embrace. She learned that empowerment meant not just claiming her professional worth, but protecting her personal well-being. During this period of reflection and growth, Claire received devastating news. Jennifer and Craig's marriage had imploded spectacularly. Craig had been arrested for fraud in connection with a Ponzi scheme that had bilked elderly investors out of their retirement savings. Jennifer, left with massive debts and legal troubles, had lost their house and was facing bankruptcy. The family pressure resumed immediately, with relatives calling Claire to suggest that family should help family, and that Claire's success created an obligation to rescue Jennifer from the consequences of her own choices. The old Claire might have felt guilty, might have opened her checkbook out of family loyalty and ingrained patterns of rescue and accommodation. But the woman Claire had become understood the difference between compassion and enabling, between love and manipulation. She ensured that Jennifer had information about legal aid services, substance abuse counseling, and women's shelters, but she refused to provide money that would only delay Jennifer's need to confront her own patterns and choices. Then came the night that brought us back to our opening scene. Claire was in her home office, reviewing contracts for international expansion of Reading Renaissance, when the doorbell rang at nearly 10 p.m. Through the peephole, she saw Jennifer's tear-streaked face pressed against the glass, looking desperate and broken in ways that might have triggered Claire's old caretaking instincts. "Claire, please. I know I hurt you, but Craig left me with nothing and Dad needs surgery we can't afford." Jennifer sobbed through the door, her voice cracking with what sounded like genuine desperation. "I haven't eaten in 2 days. I'm going to lose everything. And Dad, they moved up his surgery date. We need $50,000 by Friday or they'll postpone it indefinitely." Every word was calculated to trigger Claire's old patterns. Family loyalty, guilt over having money while Jennifer suffered, fear for their father's health, the familiar role of family rescuer that had defined her for so many years. But Claire had learned to recognize manipulation tactics with the same clarity she brought to identifying struggling readers who needed different teaching approaches. She calmly called the hospital and verified that Robert's surgery was scheduled for the following month exactly as planned, with payment arrangements already in place through Claire's direct coordination with the billing department. When Claire didn't immediately open the door, Jennifer's tactics shifted to public shaming. "I know you can hear me. Your neighbors are watching. Do you want them to see how cold you've become? How success has turned you into someone who abandons family in their darkest hour?" Then came the guilt about their mother. "Mom would be ashamed of you. She raised us to take care of each other. You're betraying everything she taught us about love and loyalty." Finally, Jennifer played what she believed was her trump card. She slid an envelope under the door containing a letter Claire had written to their mother during her cancer treatment, a letter never sent, expressing Claire's fears about taking care of Jennifer alone after their mother's death. Jennifer had kept it for years as insurance, waiting for the right moment to use Claire's own vulnerabilities against her. "I could show this to Dad, to the family," Jennifer threatened through the door. "Show them how you really felt about taking care of me after Mom died. Or you could open this door and we could work this out like sisters should." Claire read the letter, her 22-year-old self's raw fear and resentment about becoming a surrogate parent to her teenage sister. She felt a momentary flash of shame, but then something else. Recognition of how much she'd sacrificed, how early her pattern of self-abandonment had begun, and how normal and human her private fears had been. Instead of shame, Claire felt compassion for that scared young woman who'd given up her dreams to raise someone else's child. She realized that even her private fears and resentments had been normal, forgivable, part of the human experience of grief and responsibility that had been thrust upon her far too young. Claire opened the door, but she didn't invite Jennifer in. She stood in the doorway, calm and centered, looking at the sister who'd shaped so much of her life through manipulation and emotional blackmail. "I read the letter," Claire said quietly. "I was 22 years old, scared and grieving. Of course I had doubts about raising a teenager, but I did it anyway. I gave you everything I had, and I did my best with skills and resources I didn't really possess." Jennifer's manipulation escalated to threats and rage, when her usual tactics failed. "You think you're so much better than me now, don't you? With your business and your success and your independence. But you're still the same pathetic woman who needed me to have a life worth living, without me to take care of. What are you? Nothing." Claire finally understood the complete dynamic that had controlled her life for decades. Jennifer hadn't just stolen her money. She'd been systematically stealing her sense of worth, convincing her that her value came from usefulness to others, that her identity was tied to being needed rather than being respected. "You're right about one thing," Claire said with quiet strength. "I am different now. I've learned that love doesn't require anyone to make themselves smaller. Real family wants to see you grow, not keep you trapped in roles that serve their needs rather than yours." Claire reached into her purse and pulled out business cards for a women's shelter, a substance abuse counselor, and a legal aid clinic. "These people can help you get back on your feet and deal with the legal issues you're facing. But I won't enable your self-destruction anymore, and I won't let you use our father as a weapon against my boundaries." Jennifer's desperate manipulation exploded into pure rage. "Fine. See how you feel when Dad dies alone because his daughters are too selfish to take care of him. See how it feels when the whole family knows what kind of person you really are. You think your little business makes you special? I'll make sure everyone knows how you abandoned your family for money." But the threats that once would have terrified Claire into submission now sounded like the tantrum of a child who'd lost control of her favorite toy. Claire stepped back into her doorway with absolute calm. "I've already told Dad the truth about what happened between us. I've been managing his medical care for months, working directly with his doctors and the hospital billing department. And our family, the people who actually love and support me, they know who I really am." As she prepared to close the door, Claire added, "I hope you find what you're looking for, Jennifer. I hope you find the help you need and the peace you deserve. But you won't find either by trying to tear other people down or by expecting others to rescue you from the consequences of your own choices." Jennifer screamed threats about lawyers, family destruction, and public humiliation as Claire gently but firmly closed the door. But for the first time in her life, Claire wasn't afraid of Jennifer's anger, wasn't consumed with guilt about setting boundaries, wasn't worried about being perceived as selfish or uncaring. She'd finally learned that she couldn't control other people's choices, only her own responses to them. She'd learned that real love celebrates growth rather than demanding stagnation, that healthy relationships are based on mutual respect rather than one-sided sacrifice, and that empowerment isn't about power over others, but about the power to be authentically yourself. 3 months later, Claire stood in the conference room of Reading Renaissance headquarters, looking out at the city where she'd spent her entire life, but was now viewing from a perspective she'd never imagined possible. Her company had gone public, making her officially a multi-millionaire. But more importantly, she'd built something that was changing lives on a scale that extended far beyond financial success. Teachers across the country reported that students weren't just improving academically through her curriculum. They were gaining confidence, self-advocacy skills, and belief in their own potential. The methods Claire had developed through her own journey towards self-worth were teaching others to recognize their value too. Robert's recovery from surgery had gone smoothly, with Claire managing his care through professional support and family involvement, but entirely on her terms. He visited her office regularly, proud to tell anyone who would listen about his daughter's success and increasingly able to see through the manipulation tactics he'd previously accepted as normal family dynamics. Jennifer had eventually found her own path to recovery through the resources Claire had provided, though their relationship remained distant and carefully bounded. Claire felt no obligation to repair what Jennifer had chosen to break, but she felt no bitterness either. Jennifer's choices had ultimately led Claire to discover her own strength. The woman looking out at the city was fundamentally different from the teacher who'd discovered her empty bank account 3 years earlier. Where that woman had apologized for taking up space, This woman commanded rooms with quiet confidence. Where that woman had needed others' approval to feel valuable, this woman knew her worth came from within. Claire had become a voice for women over 40 who felt invisible, undervalued, or stuck in patterns that no longer served them. Her speaking engagements drew standing-room-only crowds of women ready to write new chapters in their own stories. "It's never too late to become who you were meant to be," she told audiences. "The skills you've developed, the wisdom you've gained, the strength you've built through surviving whatever tried to break you, these aren't consolation prizes for getting older. They're your competitive advantages for creating the life you actually want." Standing in her office that evening, Claire reflected on what she'd learned about true strength. It wasn't about being harder or colder or more ruthless. It was about being softer with yourself while getting clearer about your boundaries. It was about extending compassion while refusing to accept disrespect. It was about loving people enough to let them experience the consequences of their choices. As our story closes, Claire's journey reminds us that sometimes the people who hurt us most are the ones who reveal our greatest strength. Sometimes losing everything we thought we wanted leads us to everything we never knew we needed. And sometimes the biggest betrayal is the one that finally sets us free to become who we were always meant to be. If Claire's story resonates with you, I'd love to hear about your own journey of empowerment in the comments below. What moment made you realize your own worth? How did you find the courage to choose yourself? Your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. And if you enjoyed this empowering story of transformation, please give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to Weathered Rose Stories for more tales of courage, resilience, and the beautiful strength that comes from weathering life's storms. Remember, you're not just a survivor of your circumstances, you're the author of what comes next. Until our next story, keep believing in your own beautiful, unstoppable strength.